Hey everybody, I'm joining you today on an exceptionally warm mid-March day in 2024 to take a hike around Cantwell Cliffs. This is one of the sights to see in the Hocking Hills region, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to take a walk around here today and see what the area has to offer. As with most good natural area, there's a trail map to kick off the entrance to Cantwell Cliffs. And what we're going to do is hike this trail, and it's about a mile, I think, round trip. And we'll take a part where we'll go through Cantwell Cliffs proper, and then hike along part of the gorge that runs below Cantwell Cliffs as well. Okay, so we'll see both some cliff features as well as some stream side riparian zone features on this hike. There are a couple features here at Cantwell Cliffs that were also built by the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, as part of the New Deal. And here, for example, is a pavilion that would have been built at that time with a stone floor and just basically, wooden structure. You can see some of this is hand hewn. Okay, these beams are hand hewn and pieced together by with pins. Take a look at that. So here you can see where the braces were pinned to the beam. So it's possible that a great deal of this structure was built without nails, actually, at the time. And so, that kind of construction, that solid construction has withstood the sands of time and is still here. Okay, so this is a pretty large pavilion area near the trail entrance of Cantwell Cliffs. Here you start in an upland and descend down into the cliff. And up here at this point, there's a mixture, in terms of the vegetation, there's a mixture of hemlocks. I've talked about hemlocks several times on this series by now in the area. Here's a beech tree. I haven't talked a great deal about beeches yet, but I always say, it's a beech because everybody's carved their name in it. So there are beeches around here. I see hickories, maples, and up the hill a little bit, about 50 feet in front of me, I see pitch pines, which I identified at Clear Creek in an episode. So I'll show those up close when I get near one. So we're going to descend into Cantwell Cliffs and take a look around. So the way they have the trails arranged here is I think this started largely during COVID, is they'd like you to move through this area in one way around these trails. I guess so you're just not, running into conflict with people and things like that. But we'll follow directions and see what we see. This trail's fairly steep. There's a fair bit of erosion on this trail, as you can see, which is never a great thing, but it happens. Then here's some stone stairs that would have been built. You can see the sandstone in between the mortar is quite worn because of countless foot traffic that would have come through this area through the years on their way down to see the sights. The Hocking Hills, as many of you know, is a heavily visited, feature of Ohio's natural landscape. So it's sort of a constant battle with wanting people to visit and see these sites, but also to try to protect them as much as possible so they're not degraded. With the thousands of people that come here every year, I think the state does a pretty good job of that. This is Cantwell Cliffs. This one's a little bit out of the way. It is not probably one of the most commonly visited of the sites. That's more places like Old Man's Cave and some of the places I've visited on this series, Ash Cave and Cedar Falls. Okay, those are all kind of in the same vicinity with each other. And are heavily visited. This one's a little bit out of the way. As I mentioned, it's the most northeast of the sites. And so just a little bit out of the way and a little bit less visited. Nonetheless, here I'm getting near a cliff edge. Okay, so we will eventually descend down there. Okay, but I'm overlooking a valley that has tulip trees, hemlocks, maples, hickory. I can see all sorts of things. And I'm not going to get too close here. I'll just reach out with my camera to show you where we're heading. This, of course, again, is Blackhand sandstone, these rocks that we're looking at. Okay, and the way these cliffs form, again, is that the upper layers tend to be a little bit harder, less erodible than the lower layers, and they tend to get gouged out by wind and water and time, leaving caves or rock shelters and so forth in their place. Okay, now I'm going to descend down a little feature that's through time has been commonly known as what might not be PC anymore, but was commonly known as Fat Woman Squeeze. So I don't know what this should be called now, but let's do it. And what it is just a narrow passageway down between these rocks, and it's pretty tight down here. So let's see what we can do. Yeah, these rocks are very well worn. And there's some spots here you could get stuck, you know. It's noticeably cooler. It's an exceptionally warm day, as I mentioned. Probably approaching 72, 73 degrees for mid-March is way out of whack. I think I picked a good day to come here too, because it is a nice day, but it is a weekday. And there aren't that many people around. There were about a dozen cars in the parking lot. If you were to come back here in May, that parking lot would be full, completely full in a day like today. So I think that this worked out pretty well. Lots of interesting formations on the cliff faces. This is an interesting contrast, okay? So this side of the cliff right here, this wall, is the cool side, okay? It's the cool, moist, north-facing side. And it has moss. It's noticeably cool to the touch, and there's obviously moss and algae growing right on it. Okay, if we go right across the other side, this is the more south and west-facing cliff. It is, the temperature doesn't feel that much different, but you can see it is not covered by moss and algae to the same extent as the other side. Okay, it's just a completely different microenvironment, you would call that. Okay, over here than we have over there. Okay, just because it's cooler and moister. So you can, as you look at this sandstone, you can see there's a lot of fine sand, but occasional larger particles, small rocks. Okay, just basically stuck in that sandstone, which adds to the texture. And of course, erosion has created all kinds of interesting patterns in, you know, what the sandstone looks like, depending on the toughness of the layers that are in these cliffs. And then you get these pockmark kind of formations, which are really cool. Now we've descended a little bit further, and this is the larger rock shelter with the classic waterfall coming over top of it that a lot of these features in the Hocking Hills display. Okay, so there's the recess that's occurred in the cliff from the base down there to the top. To me, looks to be about, it's probably about 100 feet, 80 to 100 feet. Again, I'm not entirely sure the height there. And it's not been exceptionally wet, so that waterfall's not running very strongly, but it is running. All right, so it's really interesting. Now, you used to be able to walk out into that area, and technically I'm not sure if they would like you to do that anymore, so I'll refrain. Looks like there is a fence here, but it's been knocked down. But as I've stepped into this area, I'm getting that sensation I just talked about when I visited Ash Cave, where it suddenly got quiet. Just this little portion here, it's gotten quiet as the sound has become muffled. And this is also the kind of place where I could talk softly on this side of this rock shelter, and to someone on the other side over there could hear me as the sound would just bounce along the walls and reach the other side. Okay, so this is the main feature with the waterfall at Cantwell Cliffs. Very nice. Now, there's a group of people following me, so I'm going to move along, just show you a few more of the rock features. We have, again, lots of patterning, pock marks, striations. A lot of this stuff is lichen, okay? Lichen, which is a symbiosis between algae and bacteria. Algae and fungi, excuse me. Where the algae are photosynthetic and provide sugars to the fungi, and the fungi, you know, attach to the rocks and do the other part of the symbiosis. Okay, so let's move along. So I've started descending down from Cantwell Cliffs toward the base of the cliff. And I want to pause to show you something here. This is something we haven't seen yet on the series. This green stuff, this flat green stuff against the rock here is not algae. It's not moss. It's actually a plant. It's what we would call a lower plant. This plant doesn't have roots. This plant doesn't have a vascular system. It doesn't make seeds or flowers for that matter. Okay, these are liverworts. Okay, liverworts. So they reproduce via spores. So they have characteristics of their algal ancestors, but they are classified as plants, excuse me. Okay, but they are primitive. Okay, these things came out of the water and are amongst our earliest and most ancient plants. About 450 million years ago, maybe 475 million years ago, our first land plants looked a lot like these liverworts that we're seeing today. So they're little, they don't get very big, they live in moist areas, they need water to survive and to reproduce. But so there ain't much to look at necessarily, but they've been around for 475 million years. So you got to hand it to them, okay? They're pretty successful in my book because of that. And these cliffs have a lot of vegetation that hangs down, ferns of various species. Cliff communities are really interesting. There you look up at many layers and levels there, okay, of plants clinging to cliffs. Okay, so we're going to descend and walk down the valley a bit and then come back across what's called the Rim Trail here at Cantwell Cliffs. So we're approximately here. We'll head down the valley a bit and then come back around on top of the cliffs on the Rim Trail. As you walk along these trails below a cliff, anywhere you go, seeing these big boulders like this are always fun, because this boulder undoubtedly at some point broke off of the cliff up there above and tumbled down here. So that would have been a pretty dramatic thing to have witnessed. I haven't seen that happen in front of me before, but it certainly has happened through time in areas like this. So my day will come, I guess. I've descended below the cliffs and reached the riparian area of the stream nearby. So this is just a view of that. That creek is called Buck Creek, and it heads kind of northeast from here. And this would be the flat, what we call the riparian zone along that creek. This is a really nice walk to see wildflowers in the spring. We're just a little bit ahead of that. Things are starting to pop up but there's no good displays just yet. So, and I will certainly be sharing that with you when that happens at various places. So let's proceed a little bit now back up into some of the cliff areas along the trail in this direction. All right, I'm ascending the trail a bit, heading toward another smaller rock shelter. Not quite as dramatic as where we started, but it has a small waterfall coming over the top. And it's more like a grotto back here, I guess. So let's step up in there and take a look at it. Yep. This one recesses actually quite a bit. Maybe even a little bit more than the main cave. So, let's see. All right, what we're gonna do is take a little shortcut by this and back up to the top in that direction. But let's see what we can see while we're down here. Kind of muddy, a little bit more muddy. Let's see how close we can get without disturbing things too much. I think this is probably a good stopping point for now. There's a really cool angle. All right, so that's really showing you how that small waterfall is steadily, slowly carving back that recess cave there. Okay. And leaving behind all kinds of designs in its wake. These sandstones are so colorful. They really give you a feel for being out west in Utah or Nevada or something like that. These oranges and yellows and browns and greens even. Okay. Very cool. Now we're going to proceed back up on top. There's some folks coming behind me here. Take our turn right here. Okay. Oh, we're gonna have to do some calisthenics to get under this thing. I'd rather go over things than under in most cases, but I guess I made it on that one. And then back up the hill. Here's another view of the smaller of the caverns, recesses, from a perch a little higher. I got a group of people following me, so, which is fine. Just to really give you that feeling of how recessed they are. Okay, from the outer point of the cliff there, back to the farther reaches, it's probably about 50 feet back or so. Little by little, getting deeper every time, every year. Okay. So we'll proceed back up to the top of the cliff. It's always amazing to see these rather large trees that are basically just existing in a small, several inches layer deep of soil that sits on top of these rocks. Okay, of course, their roots are penetrating cracks and going a lot deeper. But this tree, which is a pretty nice sized hemlock tree, a couple feet in diameter, 2.5 feet in diameter probably, is basically just sitting on a plate with a thin layer of dirt, but of course with its roots extending into cracks and out and around this rock as well. But, you know, these have managed to hang on here. Of course, it's kind of protected right here from the wind being up next to the cliffside like that. But every now and then, time finally gets you. So that tree fall down there below us, that was one of the larger hemlocks that used to be here. That fell 5-8 years ago, and leaving that big tip-up mound you see. And you know, it finally got taken by the wind. Of course, it's out there and a little bit more exposed, actually in deeper soil, but it finally succumbed. All right, so let's keep on moving. Let's head on up to the rim trail now. Climbing my way out of the cliffside area, below the cliff area, that is, and back up to the top. These stairs would have probably been built originally also by the CCC. They are in various states of repair and or disrepair. So you have to be careful. At any site, you've got to be careful. This area does seem to need a little bit more maintenance in that regard than many. But here we are. Okay, back up on top again. So, where shall we go next? As I walk along the rim trail here, I see abundant hemlock regeneration. Lots of young hemlock trees here. Okay, a lot of them are perched close to the cliff. That's a sign that, you know, there's good seed production by the parent hemlocks in the area, but that these trees are also escaping, getting killed or getting eaten by deer. And that's probably truer the closer you get to the edge of the cliff. Okay, deer aren't stupid. They don't like to risk their life and limb if they can help it too, right? So trees that are in refuges, places they can kind of hide and not get pressure from deer, is where you often see regeneration happening. So I see that here. Here's one of our old friends, chestnut oak. Thick, blocky, deeply furrowed bark. Okay, we see that all throughout southeastern Ohio. And then here's something else we've looked at several times. Mountain laurel. Okay, we've seen this in Ohio, we've seen it in Pennsylvania. All throughout the Appalachian foothills and Appalachian mountains, you'll find mountain laurel. So these things will be blooming in a few months when they also, you know, display their highlights. There's another view down into the smaller of the two main rock shelters here. So just a ways down the rim trail, not very far from the main features of Cantwell Cliffs, is one of these CCC shelters. Okay, this would have been like a picnic shelter behind me here, or I don't know if camping was permitted here at one time or not, but again, this is one of those CCC shelters with the classic Lincoln log sort of construction that you see all throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania. Little rock fireplace, and there would have been, at times in the past, there was like a picnic table or benches out here. And again, I don't know if they would have allowed camping at some point, you know, overnight camping in this kind of thing. I don't think so. This is more like a little, just little temporary shelter to come visit. It's not far from the main features of the park, which are in that direction, but it seems way out of the way. It's perched on a little point that juts out on the cliff. There's actually a built little deck, if you will, out here. Okay, that puts you right in the canopy of these hemlocks. It's really cool. The wind's picking up. You can probably hear that. There actually are storms on the way. So I'm hoping I can get this episode in before I get rained on. Although that'd be fun to see, the naturalists get soaking wet one of these days. So anyhow, this is just a neat little spot I want to make sure I got to show you. There are a couple of these actually in this area. And, you know, the other thing about them is, of course, as people, it's been defaced, but not terribly in any vulgar way. You know, there's a lot of initials, you know, Sarah plus Jimmy sort of things. Nothing too offensive that I'm seeing. Okay. So this is the little shelter on the rim trail at Cantwell Cliffs. Okay. I have one more goal Two things, I guess. On my way in, I noticed something on hemlock trees that I've talked about before that is actually a real problem. I've been looking at the hemlocks where I am right now, not seeing this, but I'm going to head back up to near the entrance of Fat Woman's Squeeze and show you something there. And then I'm also going to point out the pitch pine. I told you I saw some of those near the entrance as well, just to remind you of that particular pine, which is one of our native pines here in Ohio. Okay, so I'll catch you a little further down the trail. There's a section of cliff here that is clearly harder than the other cliffs we've looked at, because as you'll see here, it's more sheer. It's sort of just a flat wall, vertical wall. Okay, with a very small stream coming over the top, which has not eroded back a large shelter below it until you get to the very bottom. There's a bit of that near the bottom, but there's a really thick block of sheer cliff there that's probably 50 or 60 feet tall that has not eroded. Okay, so that the mineral content of that is different than that sandstone below, so it's harder, it hasn't eroded in the same way. That stream's smaller than some of the other ones we've seen too. It's a little tributary to Buck Creek. But you can see along here is a much more sheer rock wall, if you will, okay? No less cool. All right, I finally got some of that solitude I've been craving. There have been just enough people here today that, you know, there's a lot of voices in the background. Makes it kind of hard to film, and it sort of messes with your zen a little bit. But I think the last larger group has moved on, and so I just thought I'd sit on the bench and chill a little bit because it's now perfectly quiet. Of course, I'm hearing now a jet in the sky, but oh well, I can't tell that to turn around. So, but this is a good spot. For that, it's a little less traveled. Get here on off days, in early mornings, off season, and you'll have this kind of solitude. It has a really nice gorge trail as well too. I didn't go too far down the gorge trail today, but if you get far down that, there's a very nice wildflower display in the riparian zone of Buck Creek, and that's where you can get away from the crowds, even during busy times. So you know, I'd recommend, again, among the many sites you can visit in southeastern Ohio in the Hocking Hills, this is a nice one, just a little bit out of the way, but still very cool. All right, so I'm going to move on. As promised, just wanted to show you what a pitch pine looks like. This is pitch pine here, these bark that looks like it's broken up into individual plates, okay, all pieced together like a puzzle. So that's pitch pine. The needles are way up there. These needles are about 4 or 5 inches long. Here's another one. Okay, they're all around here. So this is a native pine in Ohio. In areas like this, around, you know, visited areas or picnic shelters and things like that, some of these may have been planted and just proliferated. So I'm not entirely clear if these are a result of arriving here on their own or being planted originally, but they're doing quite well here at Cantwell Cliffs. Okay, throughout many of my walks, I've talked about hemlocks, these trees behind me and all surrounding this area. One of my favorite trees, okay, and just a beautiful, even on a day like today when it's dark out here, overcast, the deciduous trees haven't leafed out yet. They provide this bright bluish green to the landscape that just makes it look interesting even on these kind of dark late winter, early spring days. It's not quite technically spring yet. But when I've talked about hemlock, I've talked about some of the threats to hemlock. And here for the first time, I'm seeing it. Okay, there's something on some trees behind me that I've talked about in the past called hemlock woolly adelgid. So I'm going to show you what this looks like up close. But this is one of the sites where this invasive insect has been detected in Ohio, and where the state has done some selective treatments of the hemlocks for this pest. I have not seen it much today, but there's a tree right here near the entrance of Cantwell Cliffs. Again, Fat Woman Squeeze is literally right there, right below it. Okay, now let's take a look at it. Okay, so the white puffy stuff you see on the undersides of these hemlock needles, that's hemlock woolly adelgid. Okay, this is a sap-sucking insect that has a stylet type of mouth part that it inserts into the vascular system of these little twigs at the base of the needles, and they basically just drink plant fluids, drink the sap. And at high numbers, they can really do a number on the trees. They can kill the trees if they're really left to go unchecked. And so in certain parts of the U.S., like in North Carolina, the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, where hemlock was also formerly very abundant and dominant, it's really devastated hemlock forests throughout the southern Appalachians. The one thing about this insect is that it does get knocked back by cold winter temperatures. Okay, that will kill them back, and they take some time to recover and come back again. Here we go with more climate change news, right? This is the warmest year on record now. We had one of our warmest Februaries on record just recently. These probably have not been knocked back very much at all this year by cold winter temperatures. Okay, so they didn't get that natural check on their populations due to weather, which could lead to a particularly bad year for these things. All right, now, as I said, I have not seen many other trees in this vicinity with these things, but this one certainly does, and it's right here near the entrance. I will report this to folks I know with the Division of Forestry and so forth, who could do something about that. This is particularly important in an area like this where people, are traipsing down this trail, perhaps tall enough to knock into this foliage or play around with it like I'm doing, and inadvertently move those things from this tree to some hemlock they have in their backyard, okay, and spread this pest around. So this is a particularly kind of vulnerable location for that sort of thing to happen. So, now, what do you do about it? Well, you can treat selected trees for this insect. Here's the base of the tree itself that's infested. It's that tree just across Old Fat Woman Squeeze. More or less, you would either inject the trunk of that tree with a systemic pesticide, one containing imidacloprid, for example, or do root drenches around the base of it so that the roots take up the chemical, and it then gets moved into the vascular system and distributed around the trunk and branches and little twigs of this tree. And so, and it basically kills the insect from the inside of the tree out. Okay, it's actually the same chemical that's been used a lot for emerald ash borer in the past, although there are other chemicals that are used for that. Now, this isn't the kind of treatment you can do on an entire forest. You have to be selective. You have to protect certain trees because it's labor intensive. You got to approach every single tree that you want to treat. You can't broadcast spray this over a forest like you can do with some pesticides. Not even that I would recommend something like that. But a spot like this that's heavily visited and hemlocks are part of the experience, I think it is worth protecting these kinds of populations with pesticide if you can. Okay, this is a branch on that same tree showing again, some new infestation there. Although, the rest of this particular branch does not look to be heavily infested. It is there and it will spread. All right, so a little bit about hemlock woolly adelgid, non-native invasive insect that basically does a number on eastern hemlocks. With the storm approaching, I'll conclude my relatively short hike around Cantwell Cliffs today, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.